Headline about the 12-day occupation of the Holy Cross Church in London's King's Cross district by a group of women, some of them prostitutes. But behind the headlines, we found some issues of special importance to the black community. Whatever the moral stance we take on prostitution, it's a fact that there's been a dramatic rise in the number of black women on the streets. What may surprise or even offend some people is that these women regard themselves as no different from the thousands of other young black women, many of them single mothers, in our cities. In fact, they say that their demands are actually the basis of a campaign on behalf of all these women. Simi Bedford went to talk to some of the girls on the game.
I just, one day last November, just packed my bags and came down on the train. And then I went to one of the hotels on King's Cross and I booked in. Then I went and sat in the Wimpy bar about 11 o'clock at night time. Just sat there, didn't know anybody or anything like that. Then this English girl came up and said, oh, there's this man wanting a black girl, and I was the only black girl there at the time. So I went with him, and I went back to the hotel to do business.
Chantal is a single mother. She has 3 children. She's 21 years old, and she's been a prostitute for exactly a year. Samantha is just 20. She has a daughter of 6. She's been on the game for nearly 2 years.
Well, I'd known some friends who, like, they had friends on the game and stuff, and I thought about it for a very long time, you know. It's a very hard decision to make. And one day I just said to myself, yeah, I might as well. Nothing else left to do, and that sounds a lot better than the rest, so I thought I'd try it.
Chantal and Samantha are just 2 of the growing number of young black women who have taken to the streets to earn their living. In fact, it's said that nearly half the prostitutes that work in this area, King's Cross, are now black. And not only are their numbers growing, but these young women are very different from the traditional image of the prostitute. Many of them are well educated, most of them have children, and almost all would say that they got onto the game through their own deliberate and conscious choice, rather than being forced into prostitution through circumstances. And it's this new attitude towards their work that seems to be leading them to take the kind of political action that could have consequences, not just for prostitutes, but for young black women in general.
For many of the new black prostitutes, the story begins with a family conflict, often over moral issues.
My mother was very strict, you know, and things like that. She wouldn't, you know, let us go anywhere. The only place we used to go was school and back home. We never used to get to see the outside. And I think in most black families, when things like that happen, then the first chance the kids get, they break away. Most black people, the parents, they always have this constant reminder that when they was your age and they didn't do this and they're doing that. Most of the kids can't talk to them anyway, because with my mother, I never talked to my mother up to this day, not about anything or nothing.
Chantal became pregnant at the age of 16. Like many other black parents in a similar situation, her parents were scandalized. Chantal's mother actually called her a prostitute, and she feels that since she was already seen as immoral, it was less difficult to throw off any moral scruples about going on the game.
Yeah, my parents felt that I let them down, because when I had my daughter, they looked at it like it was the end of the world. It was the biggest crime that anybody could have committed in the first place. So they felt that I let them down. To them, I was a prostitute then. So being a prostitute now wouldn't make any difference to them. Not to my mother, anyway.
Wilmette Brown has worked with women like Chantal for more than 6 years. She believes that this kind of conflict, though it doesn't lead directly to prostitution, often forces women to leave home.
Hello? Hi. Yeah, how was the meeting? Black families have put a lot of emphasis on respectability. We've had to. It's been a way that we've tried to survive. Mm-hmm. And what has begun to happen is that there's a new generation, obviously, of black young women in this country who have all the expectations of their generation, white and black, and for whom respectability is no longer paramount in the way that it was for their parents. And a conflict develops. so that when a young woman, for one reason or another, has to leave home, she then has to deal with how she's going to survive. And she's likely to say, well, whatever worked for my parents is not good enough for me or doesn't work for me, and I'm going to survive how I can.
And it's the fact that there are so few options available for economic survival that can lead women to choose prostitution. Traditionally, employment for young black women has been restricted to low-paid public sector jobs. Today, there are fewer and fewer of these jobs available. For Chantal, at least, finding a job was a major problem.
No, I lost my another job as a machinist. I lost that because the factory closed down. And I had various jobs in between that. Because after I had my machinist job, I went to work in a biscuit factory. And that was like bloody slavery, so I gave that up. Then I went to do typing, but that was only temporary. And then I went into catering at school. That was also temporary. And then after that, I couldn't find another job.
But for many black girls of Chantal and Samantha's generation, the kind of work that their mothers took was no longer acceptable. They wanted more out of life.
First job I worked as a telephonist, sorry, not an officer. And I didn't get enough money for that. I thought, you know, I worked all week. And all I got was about 40 quid, and that just couldn't do me, you know.
Did you find that your other friends, I mean, other black girls like yourself, I mean, what kind of jobs did they have?
I mean, they either worked in factories or shops and things like that, you know. And I just couldn't like any of them. They just didn't pay enough money. I worked too hard for a little bit of money. So I said I have to do something else.
When they couldn't find satisfactory work, these women turned to social security. But they found this way of life equally difficult to accept. What they really hated was the idea of depending on the state. Women like Chantal and Samantha wanted their own homes and incomes to provide better lives for both themselves and their children. Besides, they live constantly with the fear that if they aren't seen to be secure and independent, their children might be taken away and put into care. It's both the dislike of what they see as state charity and the desire for independence that takes many black women into prostitution.
When you go down to see them, all they do is sympathize with you. I mean, you don't need that. You go to them, you're asking them for help, but they feel like you have to beg for it, sort of thing. On which, instead of I go and beg them, now when I think about it, I prefer to be out on the street than go and beg them. Because when I beg them, they feel like, well, they give it me when they want, and when they feel like it, or when they think that I'm in need of it.
I just wanted to be independent, you know. I wanted to have mine. I wanted to have things I like to have, and I knew that if I went on the game and I made that money, that I'd be able to get those things. At least I'd get a lot more money than what I would on Social Security or working, having a job.
These attitudes are creating a new style of prostitute, more self-confident and more self-reliant. Some of the women I spoke to were saving up for businesses that they intended to set up in a few years' time. And unlike previous generations of prostitutes, almost none of them were organized by pimps. "Why should I hand over my hard-earned cash to a man?" was a comment repeated by several. It's precisely because of their very different response to the problems of their work that this new generation of black prostitutes is beginning to make the public aware of just how different they are.
Women we talked to said that conditions were tougher if you were a black prostitute. White girls often sign up with escort agencies to avoid working on the streets. But black prostitutes claim that they are often shut out of the agencies.
When the agencies, you know, it's mostly English girls there, and if there's any black girls, you don't get a job. You can hang around for months and you don't get a job.
If you go to sort of places like escort agencies, they tend to say, oh, well, it's not the season for the black girls yet, you know. It's the Arab season, like the Germans like the black girls and things like that, you know. It's a bit difficult for you then.
And on the streets, they claim that the police single them out for more attention than the white prostitutes.
Because, so like where I work now, I'm the only black girls that work on that area. And there's quite a few English girls that work in the same place as I do. And the majority of the time, when the police come out, they always come straight to me and tell the rest of the girls to go home. and always nip me. But before I never complained about it, you know, because all my mates, them used to say that they're picking on me, but I used to say, oh no, you know, I always thought they've got a job to do and that's their job.
A lot of police arrests for soliciting took place here in Argyle Square. It was the response of the new black arrivals to being picked up by police that made it apparent just how different they were. In the past, prostitutes would accept the police's actions as an occupational hazard and plead guilty. Chantal wouldn't. She pleaded not guilty and won her case. It was one of the first such cases, and others may follow her lead.
They're saying they're not going to take it anymore, and that in future, when they're not guilty, they're going to plead not guilty, you know? This is something really I don't think the police really like. They want you to sort of take everything, you know?
It was this kind of feeling that led the prostitutes, many of them black, to occupy this church 3 weeks ago. At the time, the main aim was a protest against what they saw as police harassment. But a glance at this leaflet, produced at the time of the occupation, shows that the story had gone beyond just another set of people in conflict with the police. It contains a list of the occupiers' demands, which, if fulfilled, won't concern just these women. Those demands could have a major impact on the lives of many other young black women who've never had anything to do with prostitution. The first striking thing about the leaflet is its call for support from local councils and named political leaders. The occupiers seemed to be arguing that their problems should be regarded as a legitimate political cause. They have had some support from left-wing politicians like Tony Benn and Paul Boateng, and from their local MP. Kate Allen, the chair of Camden Women's Committee, and someone that the occupiers particularly looked to for support, wholeheartedly backed them.
Women who occupied the church felt that they had come to the end of their tether, that nobody was paying any attention to their needs and their demands in terms of policing in the area and the way that they were being treated. So, as far as they were concerned, that was the last stand that they could take to actually make sure that people started to take them seriously, take their demands seriously. And in terms of that, they've certainly achieved quite an amount. So I think it's very valid.
But even more significant in the future than who backed them are the issues on which the women campaigned. First, the right to decent accommodation. Second, the sort of work that will give them economic independence from their families, from men and from the state. And thirdly, black prostitutes particularly want the black community's support to make up for rejection by their own families. It's these issues that brought them onto the game in the first place. But as Wilmette Brown points out, these aren't issues that affect just prostitutes.
The demands that young black prostitute women are making are demands that affect the future of all black women in this country, because they're demands fundamentally about the lack of options in our economic lives, in our personal lives, that affect all of us. The fact that as single mothers, we have such problems with housing and accommodation and are up against the housing authorities so often is something that's common to black women generally. The fact that Social Security is low, that job options are few, that wages are low. These are issues that are really issues that concern all black women, so that here we have young black prostitute women who in many ways are the most vulnerable of black women, the most up against the law, who are raising demands really on behalf of all black women and pointing a direction for the kind of organizing that's increasingly happening among black women to go in, the kinds of direction that the black women's movement, I think, as a whole is going to take.
For activists like Wilmette Brown, however, the biggest immediate challenge may well be the reluctance of the black community itself to accept that prostitutes' demands are legitimate, either politically or morally. What do you think the attitude of the black community will be to the fact that black prostitute women are saying that fundamentally their problems are the same as all black women's problems?
Well, the initiative that young black prostitute women have taken has already opened up a tremendous debate over the whole question of respectability in the black community, whether the immorality is the poverty that black people are forced to live in, or whether the immorality is women's immorality. Because let's face it, no matter what we do as black people, it seems we never measure up, we're never respectable enough. And I think that we've reached a turning point where the kind of support that has come for black prostitute women from women who are not prostitutes has taken the position that the immorality is not with the women, but with the poverty that black people are forced to live in. In addition to that, there's the whole question of the generations of black people, because the older generation has to make a decision to support young black people who are up against the law, whereas the older generation may not in every instance agree with the means that the youth are using. There's no question that older black people have to stand behind and with people in that confrontation, or else the whole community doesn't survive.
The wider question posed by Wilmette Brown will probably be controversial, especially with people who don't agree with her views about respectability. We intend to devote one of our future studio debates to this subject, so if you have strong views on the issues raised in that film, or if you'd like to join us to discuss it on the programme, write to us here at London Weekend Television with your opinions. We'll be giving you our address in part 2. Now, if you're one of the thousands who's been anxiously checking to find out if the new